This case was hidden because it exposed a systemic betrayal hidden deep within the medical establishment. But today, I will tell you how a single doctor's greed nearly tore apart a community and how the truth almost slipped through the cracks of official silence. For years, no one dared to speak of it, but one forgotten detail in the archive changed everything. It all began in Akron, Ohio, around 2011, when I first received a tip, a whisper about Dr. Daniel Ruiz, a family physician with a spotless reputation, until he suddenly vanished from the records. The local authorities dismissed it as a retirement, but I knew better. I dug into the records, cross-referenced billing data, and found anomalies. Hundreds of patients, mostly unregistered minors and ghost accounts, were billing under his NPI number, but the payments kept flowing even when the patient's files were empty or non-existent. It smelled like a carefully constructed fraud, a shadow operation masking itself behind the veneer of community service. Would you have noticed this detail in the file? The bills that kept appearing, even when no one remembered seeing the doctor seeing those patients? It was too perfect, too convenient. I questioned the staff, but they played dumb, afraid to cross him. The local police shrugged it off, citing billing irregularities. But I knew this was more than paperwork. This was an elaborate scheme to siphon money, possibly to fund something darker. What was Dr. Ruiz really doing? Was he just padding his income, or was there a deeper conspiracy? As I dug further, I discovered a pattern. The fake diagnoses, the phantom patients. It wasn't just money. This doctor was issuing hundreds of false medical records, creating fake health crises, all for a cut of the insurance payouts. A shadow clinic operating in the shadows of the city's strip malls, hidden behind the facade of normalcy. And then I uncovered his family's involvement. His wife, Danielle Ruiz, was listed as the clinic's office manager. She knew, or at least suspected, but she never spoke. His daughter worked part-time at the front desk, oblivious or complicit. The family was feeding into this machine, a web of lies spun tight, each member playing their part. If this had happened in your family, what would you have done? I started to suspect that Dr. Ruiz's operation wasn't just about money. There were whispers of crypto transfers, discrete cash payments, untraceable accounts. The doctor had connections, shadowy, powerful. Someone was backing him, someone who wanted the operation to stay hidden. I questioned whether this was a simple fraud or part of a larger network, perhaps even linked to illicit activities beyond medicine. But then, betrayal. I was approached unofficially by a source, someone who claimed to be a whistleblower inside the operation. They warned me to back off, to forget what I'd seen. Pressure mounted. I was followed. My calls tapped. The deeper I looked, the more I realized I was poking into something dangerous. I felt the walls closing in. And yet, I pressed on. I obtained the original billing records, the FOIA documents, and traced the money flow. The payments originated from shell companies linked to a series of offshore accounts. Data showed the doctor was issuing diagnoses for unnecessary procedures, pocketing the difference and funneling the rest abroad. This was organized crime, disguised as healthcare. By 2013, the investigation reached a boiling point. I uncovered a network of ghost clinics, fronts for money laundering and possibly other crimes. I questioned Dr. Ruiz's colleagues, but most kept silent, either out of fear or complicity. The local DA's office was slow, hesitant, perhaps bought off in subtle ways. I filed reports, but nothing concrete happened. I began to doubt if justice would ever be served. Then came the ultimate betrayal. A mole within my team leaked information to the doctor. My evidence was compromised, deadlines missed, and my credibility questioned. I began to feel the weight of the system turning against me. Was I naive to think this could be stopped? Or was I just another obstacle to be silenced? In the end, Dr. Ruiz disappeared around late 2014. The clinic shut down quietly, and he vanished from the public eye. No arrest, no trial, just a quiet exile. The official explanation was retirement, but I knew better. He was silenced, or perhaps he was warned. Maybe he's still out there, hiding behind a false identity, waiting for the next opportunity. And the family? His wife and daughter moved away, their names scrubbed from local records. I often wonder what they knew, what they suspected, and whether they're still involved somewhere. Silent witnesses to a crime that was never fully uncovered. This case left a mark on me, a reminder of how easily trust can be exploited, how silence protects the guilty, and how the corruption runs deeper than anyone wants to admit. Every file, every witness, every piece of evidence pointed to a single truth. The system was compromised. Why was this hidden for so long? Would you have believed the official version if you had been told? Or would you have seen the cracks from the very start? If this investigation were handed over today, I wonder, how many others like Dr. Ruiz are out there, operating in the shadows, invisible behind the masks of respectability? The question remains, how many more ghosts are walking among us, cloaked in white coats and false smiles? If you've listened this far, you're searching for the truth. Subscribe, I'll show you the next case. These files rarely survive to the end. Subscribe while this one is still here. You already see this wasn't an accident. Want more? Subscribe. I've solved more than one case, and this is only the beginning. Subscribe if you're ready for the next. This file was never meant to be released. Subscribe while it's accessible. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the investigation. Subscribe. And this is only one episode. Subscribe so I can show you the next. Every day, I'll post a real case from my archive, investigations I solved that still unsettle me. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment. It really helps this channel. Stay safe. See you tomorrow. The story didn't end with Dr. Ruiz's disappearance. Not entirely. After his shadowy exile, the investigation went dark, officially closed, buried under bureaucratic shuffles and political silence. But I kept digging, secretly. I couldn't let it go. Something about the way he vanished, the silence that followed, told me this was only the surface of a much larger, darker operation. A few months after Ruiz disappeared, I uncovered a crucial detail, an internal document, a ledger of sorts, stored in a forgotten server. It listed not just Ruiz's accounts, but a network of other doctors, clinics, and intermediaries, each one a node in a sprawling web of false diagnoses, ghost patients, and illicit transfers. It was called Operation Red Moon, a code name I'd never encountered before. Would you have noticed this detail? The pattern of connections, the coded entries? It looked like an organized crime syndicate, disguised as a healthcare system. The ledger hinted at a clandestine operation that spanned multiple states: California, Texas, Florida, and possibly beyond. The money trail led to shell companies with no physical address linked to offshore accounts in the Caymans, Panama, the Virgin Islands. Who was funding this? Why was I so sure it was more than just a doctor's greed? Because the scale was staggering. The volume of false diagnoses, tens of thousands, generated in a network of clinics that looked legitimate on paper, but were ghost fronts. Some of them appeared as small strip mall practices, others as mobile units parked in secluded parking lots, all of them connected to Ruiz and his inner circle. The question gnawed at me. How deep did this go? Was Dr. Ruiz acting alone, or was he part of a bigger operation? The evidence suggested the latter. The pattern of the phony diagnoses was too systematic. Each patient, each procedure, carefully scripted, designed to maximize payouts. And behind it all, someone was orchestrating it, someone with access, influence, and a keen understanding of insurance loopholes. Did you ever wonder how many so-called victims of this system truly understood what they were getting? Unregistered minors, veterans, the elderly, people who trusted their doctors, never suspecting their pain was being exploited? Many of those records, never even verified by physical visits. They were created by the shadow clinics with fake signatures, fake symptoms, and fake histories. And the doctors involved, many of them coerced, threatened, or simply bought off. I found records indicating payments disguised as consultation fees, training sessions, or research grants. The whole operation was a labyrinth of deception designed to keep scrutiny at bay. Why do I say this was a shadow operation? Because I uncovered that some of the money was funneled into untraceable crypto wallets, hidden behind layers of shell companies. The cash moved through a web of offshore accounts, making it impossible for authorities to pin down the real beneficiaries. It was a sophisticated setup, more than just a rogue doctor trying to make a quick buck. And then, betrayal again. I received an anonymous tip, an encrypted message warning me to back off. The sender hinted that I was getting too close, that certain people didn't want this story told. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen, knowing that I'd crossed a line. Someone inside the operation was watching. Someone didn't want the truth exposed. In the silence that followed, I realized I was dealing with more than just fraud. This was about power, influence, and control. The same people who could manipulate insurance payouts could also manipulate local officials, law enforcement, and even political figures. The cover-up wasn't just about hiding a doctor's greed, It was about protecting a network that thrived in the shadows, feeding off human vulnerability. The turning point came unexpectedly. An old contact, someone I'd worked with during my tenure at the FBI, found a hidden file on a sealed server in Travis County, Texas. It contained a list of approved diagnoses used across multiple clinics, standardized scripts, pre-approved by a shadow panel of physicians and administrators. These diagnoses were engineered to justify the payouts, no matter the actual health condition. It was a blueprint for systematic deception. Why would a doctor or a network of doctors go to such lengths? Greed, yes, but also something more insidious. Control over the healthcare narrative, profit from human misery, and perhaps some hidden agenda I will probably never fully understand. I remember questioning whether I had missed signs earlier. Signs of families being victimized, of patients being misled, of an entire community unknowingly complicit. Did anyone see what I saw? Or was everyone just too afraid to look? And then, the final blow. In late 2014, I learned that Dr. Ruiz had been quietly rehired under a different alias, working in a neighboring state, in a clinic that looked legit on paper but operated exactly the same way. All the evidence suggested he'd been protected, moved, hidden. The system had failed again. What's most unsettling? The fact that this operation probably still exists. Somewhere out there, another shadow clinic, another doctor issuing fake diagnoses, another network laundering money. It's a ghost that refuses to die, lurking behind the guise of legitimate healthcare providers. And I ask myself, would you have believed this if you had been told? Would you have looked deeper? Or would you, like most, have accepted the sanitized version fed to the public? If this case were investigated today, I wonder, how many more layers would be uncovered? How many other operations like Ruiz's are still running, invisible, untouched? The truth is, the system is only as strong as its weakest link, those silent enough to look away. If you've listened this far, you're searching for the truth. Subscribe, I'll show you the next case. These files rarely survive to the end. Subscribe while this one is still here. You already see this wasn't an accident. Want more? Subscribe. I've solved more than one case, and this is only the beginning. Subscribe if you're ready for the next. This file was never meant to be released. Subscribe while it's accessible. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the investigation. Subscribe. And this is only one episode. Subscribe so I can show you the next. Every day I'll post a real case from my archive, investigations I solved that still unsettle me. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment. It really helps this channel. Stay safe. See you tomorrow. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that the network's reach extended far beyond what I initially suspected. The shadow clinics, the fake diagnoses, the offshore accounts, they were just the surface layer. Beneath that, I uncovered a pattern of influence that infiltrated local health departments, insurance companies, even certain courts. It was a web of corruption, and Ruiz was merely a small piece in the puzzle. I found evidence suggesting that some of the diagnoses issued by Ruiz's operatives were deliberately crafted to exploit loopholes in federal health programs, Medicare, and Medicaid. Fake claims, inflated bills, unearned reimbursements. It was a systemic bleed, draining millions from taxpayer-funded programs, and nobody was stopping it. How many of these claims went unnoticed? How many families had been manipulated into unnecessary treatments, unknowingly complicit in this shadow economy? And I kept asking myself, who was pulling the strings? Who orchestrated this sprawling operation? The pattern of shell companies, offshore accounts, and coded transactions pointed to someone with significant influence. Someone who knew how to keep their hands clean while their network operated in the dark. One night, I intercepted an encrypted message. It was a meeting schedule, set for a discreet location in Fresno, California. The message included a list of names, doctors, lawyers, and some local officials. The message was clear. This was a hub of activity, a node in the larger network. I realized I was onto something big, something that could shake the foundation of several institutions if exposed. But I also knew I was close to a dangerous edge. I was warned again and again that my investigation was stirring up forces that didn't want to be seen. I questioned whether I was merely a nuisance to them or a threat. The pressure increased. My phone was tapped, my emails monitored. I remember sitting in my lonely office, staring at the files, knowing full well that someone was watching me. Would you have believed this if you saw the evidence? The way the system protected its own, even when it was rotten at the core. that some doctors were on the payroll, not because they believed in healing, but because they owed favors or were coerced into silence. This wasn't just about greed. It was about control over people's health, their trust, and ultimately, their lives. In late 2015, I received an anonymous tip about a confidential investigation run by a shadowy group, an elite circle that seemed to operate above the law. They called it Operation Red Moon, but I began to suspect it was more than a simple code name. It was a symbol signifying the darkness that had engulfed our healthcare system, a circle of powerful people using the guise of medical professionalism to hide their true agenda. I remember confronting the fact that some of the most trusted figures in the local medical community were implicated. Doctors, administrators, even some who had served in government advisory roles. They had willingly or unknowingly become part of this operation, their reputations forged on a foundation of lies. It was a betrayal that cut deep. The final blow came when I learned that Ruiz's operation had been quietly rebranded and relocated. The new clinics looked identical to the old, yet they operated under different licenses, with new staff, new addresses. The entire operation had gone underground, adapting to the constant pressure. They had learned how to hide better, how to vanish before the authorities could catch up. And I wondered, how many others like him still exist? How many doctors, clinics, and networks are still issuing false diagnoses, siphoning funds, and controlling the narrative behind the scenes? It's a silent epidemic, masked by legitimate healthcare, feeding off the trust we place in doctors. Would you have believed this if you had been told? That an entire shadow industry exists, thriving in the gaps of our system. That the people we trust with our lives are sometimes the very ones exploiting that trust? I ask myself, what would I have done if I had a family depending on those false diagnoses? Would I have turned a blind eye or fought to expose the truth? If this investigation were happening today, I believe the scope would be even larger. There are layers of secrecy I've yet to uncover. More clinics, more doctors, more money laundering schemes. The truth is, the system's defenses are stronger than we like to admit. The real question is, how many of these networks are still operating, hidden in plain sight? If you've listened this far, you're searching for the truth. Subscribe. I'll show you the next case. These files rarely survive to the end. Subscribe while this one is still here. You already see this wasn't an accident. Want more? Subscribe. I've solved more than one case, and this is only the beginning. Subscribe if you're ready for the next. This file was never meant to be released. Subscribe while it's accessible. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the investigation. Subscribe. And this is only one episode. Subscribe so I can show you the next. Every day I'll post a real case from my archive, investigations I solve that still unsettle me. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment. It really helps this channel. Stay safe. See you tomorrow. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't a single rogue doctor's scheme or a local anomaly. It was a meticulously organized enterprise that spanned across states, with layers of cover stories, encrypted communications, and a network of insiders, each playing their part in a vast invisible operation. I found evidence linking several other doctors to Ruiz's original team, some still working in quiet clinics, others mysteriously gone, their records erased or altered. One particular lead took me to a web of unregistered clinics in Queens, New York, where I discovered a pattern of suspicious billing activity. These clinics appeared legitimate on paper, well-designed websites, licensed personnel, but behind the scenes, they were ghost operations. They had no real patient contact, only fake visits generated through manipulated electronic health records. The diagnoses issued there matched the standard scripts from Ruiz's ledger, coded, generic, designed solely to maximize payouts. Would you have noticed the subtle clues, the identical templates, the repetitive phrasing, the way the patients never had follow-up visits or real medical histories? I did, and I knew this was no coincidence. This was a blueprint. An entire operation replicating itself across different states, each branch connected by encrypted channels and shared personnel. The operation's mastermind was clearly someone with access to sophisticated technology and a deep understanding of healthcare billing loopholes. I found encrypted chat logs referencing The Circle, Red Moon, and Project Phoenix, names that suggested a higher echelon, an elite group orchestrating the entire thing. They weren't just criminals, they were operators, controlling the flow of false diagnoses, the laundering of illicit funds, and the manipulation of insurance giants. Why would they do this? The answer was complex. Money, of course, but also power, control over the narrative of health itself. By fabricating diagnoses, they could influence local policies, sway insurance reimbursements, and even manipulate public health data, making it seem like certain regions had higher or lower rates of illness to serve hidden agendas. And then I stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence, an internal memo dated just before Ruiz's disappearance, discussing a test run in Fresno, California. It outlined plans for expansion, for setting up new clinics, and for securing the trust of local officials. The language was cold, clinical, like reading a blueprint of a criminal operation disguised as a healthcare rollout. Who was behind this? Who was funding this operation? I traced the financials through a series of shell companies layered deep in offshore jurisdictions. The money moved through accounts with no physical address, untraceable without insider knowledge. It was clear, someone with immense resources, someone who could buy influence and silence. But I was running out of time. The operations were too well hidden, and I sensed I was being watched more closely than ever. My contacts warned me. Some of the people inside the system were already turning against me, feeding false information, planting doubts about my credibility. I felt the walls closing in, but I couldn't stop. Not now. I questioned everything I'd believed about healthcare, about trust, about the system's integrity. Was this just greed, or was there a darker motive? Could it be about more than money, something involving control over people's health data, or even worse? I shuddered at the thought. In early 2016, I received a sealed package, an anonymous tip with a USB drive. Inside, I found a series of recordings captured covertly at a clandestine meeting in a high-rise hotel in Dallas, Texas. Men and women in suits discussing the next phase, scaling up, and safe passage. The tone was cold, calculated. They talked about expanding the network and protecting the operation from interference. I listened, trembling, realizing I'd uncovered a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that went beyond healthcare, possibly into political influence or even covert operations linked to private interests. Did you ever wonder how many layers of deception are hiding right in front of us? How many times do we trust the people in white coats, only to find they're part of something much darker? I asked myself, what if the entire system is compromised and we're just pawns in some unseen game? The final revelation came in late 2016. I tracked a series of payments made to a private security firm, one that specialized in covert operations, linked to a front company registered just outside Houston, Texas. The payments coincided with key moments when investigations were gaining traction. Was I being surveilled, threatened, or just paranoid? The answer haunted me. I knew I had touched something dangerous, something that could topple careers, shake institutions, and expose a truth most would prefer remain buried. But I also knew that silence only protected the guilty. So I keep asking, how deep does this run? Are there still clinics issuing false diagnoses, still laundering money, still controlling the narrative behind the scenes? Or was Ruiz just the tip of the iceberg? Would you have believed it if I told you this was happening right under our noses? The system's veneer of legitimacy is fragile, thin enough to crack under the weight of truth. And if I've learned anything, it's that those who operate in the shadows will do everything they can to keep their secrets hidden. If this investigation had a conclusion, it's only this: the fight against corruption in healthcare is ongoing. The networks are resilient, the cover-up sophisticated, and the stakes higher than most imagine. The question is, how many more like Ruiz are still out there, quietly running the same game? If you've listened this far, you're searching for the truth. Subscribe. I'll show you the next case. These files rarely survive to the end. Subscribe while this one is still here. You already see this wasn't an accident. Want more? Subscribe. I've solved more than one case, and this is only the beginning. Subscribe if you're ready for the next. This file was never meant to be released. Subscribe while it's accessible. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the investigation. Subscribe. And this is only one episode. Subscribe so I can show you the next. Every day I'll post a real case from my archive, investigations I solved that still unsettle me. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment. It really helps this channel. Stay safe. See you tomorrow.